de San Diego, y es el doctor Steve Coe y la doctora María Martínez. Les pido un aplauso para ellos y seguramente que sus pláticas van a ser muy interesantes. Entonces, doctor N.G.
Doctor Rivero, muchas gracias por haber llegado hasta acá con la carrera acabando de terminar. Pues muchas gracias a todos por venir, de veras. Una presentación tan temprano en domingo siempre es difícil de llegar, entonces qué amabilidad de ustedes. Yo ahorita voy a presentar al grupo que vamos a darles esta plática. Y si me pones primero la primera diapositiva, por favor, para empezar, y vámonos recio con esto para poder tener tiempo para preguntas. ¿Sí me pones la primera diapositiva? Bueno, mientras voy a empezar, el doctor Steve Coe, que es profesor asistente de psiquiatría en el Departamento de Psiquiatría de la Universidad de California, San Diego, es director de la Clínica de Servicios Externos, también director del programa de Psiquiatría Comunitaria, es cofundador del programa para enfermería de entrenamiento clínico y director del programa de telepsiquiatría por la universidad también. Es asesor y consultante en el Hospital Naval de Balboa, en San Diego. Como todos sabemos, allí ha sido una base militar desde hace mucho tiempo. Está certificado tanto en psiquiatría de adultos como en psiquiatría geriátrica, y se graduó de la Universidad de Johns Hopkins y de la Escuela de Medicina de UCSD, o la Universidad de California en San Diego. Tiene una maestría en salud pública y una maestría en administración de negocios. Él fue el coordinador del comité científico para la reunión de la APA en Atlanta en 2016. Los que fueron lo habrán escuchado hablar durante la ceremonia inaugural, y ahora es el vicecoordinador, que así se acostumbra, ya eres coordinador un año y luego pasas a ser vicecoordinador el siguiente año, para la reunión en San Diego, donde nos esperamos allá en mayo del 2017. También me acompaña la doctora María Martínez. Ella es una profesora asistente del Departamento de Psiquiatría de UCSD, también es neuropsicóloga e investigadora, es nativa de Uruguay. Sus intereses en la investigación la llevaron a Estados Unidos, donde completó su doctorado en Tucson, Arizona, y estudios de posgrado en la Clínica de Neuropsicología de la Universidad de Duke. Hace investigación en salud mental de ancianos o de personas mayores. Su foco de estudio son los predictores negativos y positivos del envejecimiento en personas latinas, de origen latino, viviendo en Estados Unidos. Ha publicado múltiples manuscritos y dado conferencias en diferentes partes, por eso la trajimos para acá también. Y recibe fondos de investigación por el Instituto Nacional de Salud. Actualmente es investigadora principal de dos protocolos fondeados por el NIH en salud mental y déficit neurocognitivo en pacientes mayores latinos en Estados Unidos. Bueno, con eso dicho y las presentaciones, entonces le vamos a explicar. Dividimos esta presentación en tres partes. Yo voy a empezar hablando de lo que estamos acostumbrados a ver con el envejecimiento en el cerebro, y luego el doctor Coe va a hablar de la paradoja del envejecimiento gracias a la investigación que se ha hecho en UCSD, y finalmente la doctora Marquina va a cerrar con cuestiones de cuál es el futuro que vemos en este envejecimiento, en estos años dorados. Entonces, vamos a empezar. ¿Siguen sin ponerme las Muy bien, gracias. Entonces quiero decir que los que estamos aquí presentes le agradecemos al doctor Jesky. Ustedes también lo recordarán, Billy Jesky fue presidente también de la Asociación Psiquiátrica Americana. Él dirige el Centro de Psiquiatría Geriátrica ahí en San Diego, y como egresado de UCSD yo me siento muy orgulloso que esa universidad ha tenido dos presidentes, siendo el doctor Jesky uno de ellos, el doctor Muñoz siendo otro de ellos, que va a estar más tarde hoy aquí también, y también tuvimos un vicepresidente de la APA, que es el doctor Judd. Para los que han leído esos artículos de depresión bipolar y estudios longitudinales, él fue el primer autor, y yo creo en lo personal, además que a Steve no le gusta que yo diga eso, que es un futuro presidente de ley que van a ver, es un hombre muy activo y muy prometedor. Muy bien, entonces empezamos. Estos son las disclosures o la declaración de conflictos. Los pueden leer. Por cierto que yo me siento muy raro con lo que vamos a hacer ahora, porque quedamos para darle flujo a las diapositivas que lo vamos a presentar todo en inglés. Entonces es la primera vez que en una reunión de estas me toca hablar en inglés, pero todas las diapositivas las preparamos juntos, entonces están en inglés, así es que sí lo hacemos. Muy bien, entonces como decía, primero las presentaciones. Ok, cambiamos inglés. Then background and common understanding of aging, I'm going to be talking about that. The paradox of aging and potential areas of improvement will be by Dr. Coe, and successful aging in future direction by Dr. McKean. Okay, so background and understanding. So we know that the aging brain is affected by different facts and changes that go on with other systems and organs in the body. So that's not new. We know that cardiovascular changes can reduce aging in either having a successful aging or not. For example, control of blood pressure is very important in the development of neurocognitive deficit, renal changes, pulmonary changes, urogenital changes, issues with visual acuity and hearing, and of course physical strength and stamina. So in cognition, we know that in general the aging brain has a decrease in reaction time, fine motor skills and dexterity, difficulty learning new concepts and skills. And this part is very important because we're going to be touching on this a lot. How much new things can we learn as we age, but then we keep a lot of what we learned in the past intact. And I'm going to get into those concepts in a moment. So comprehension of complex information and decreased analytic processing. And with complex information, it has to do with multitasking, right? We see younger people now paying attention to 3-4 different things at the same time. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're efficient in all of them, but as we age, it gets harder for us to be paying attention to more things than one. And it's harder for men than for women. Women seem to be able to keep doing that until a certain age, at least older than we men can do. Brain, the volume of the brain is smaller as we age, and that actually surprises. It's the same thing with muscle mass, it's the same with bone mass. But what's interesting is that since we are 20 years old and on, we start losing about 5 to 10% of the brain mass. In this case, it's not only white matter, but especially gray matter, and the dendritic spines, which have to do with the interneuronal connections. Inflammatory proteins are very important not only in brain disease, but also in cardiovascular disease, as we know. And here in the brain, especially in the hippocampus, and here I'm touching again about that part of learning new material, which has to do with the important deficit in the elderly. Synthesis of dopamine and other neurotransmitters also goes down, and a decrease in alpha secretase of the hippocampal activity. And this enzyme, as you know, is involved in the metabolism of amyloid. Okay, so the beta amyloid precursor has to be cleaved or broken down by this enzyme. And there's also beta secretase, but the decrease in the alpha secretase causes that these precursor turns more into beta amyloid than on the good amyloid, in order to say it in a way, and a certain way. And here's the part that I was explaining to you about the crystallized knowledge and the fluid knowledge. Okay, so the crystallized knowledge, and this slide is very important, because we're going to be talking about this concept again and again. So the crystallized knowledge has to do with the accumulated knowledge and accumulated expertise. That's why as we grow old, and because we've done one thing over and over again through the years, we can become better at that. Maybe not so good at learning something new. And in English, there is this saying that it's hard to teach new tricks to an old dog. And this is where this comes from. So frequently we rely, so the crystallized knowledge is like having, like when you're preparing jello, right? And you have the mix, and it's still liquid. And you can put pieces of fruit into it, and they'll fit. But as the jello starts to crystallize, you're not able to put in more fruit. But whatever stayed there, whatever got in before the jello became crystallized, it stays there, and it's very hard to lose that. And that's what we're talking about, crystallized knowledge. So habitual procedures, things that we learn how to do, and it's the old saying that, once you learn how to ride a bike, we can always get on it again. And it holds up as we age. On the other hand, fluid knowledge has to do with novel problem solving. So you didn't learn, and then we always complain about that. Those of us that were not born into the digital area, and now we have to learn how to use a smartphone or how to use social media, and we're really slow compared to the younger people whose brain is not crystallized yet, and we're very slow at that. And it has to do with spatial manipulation, mental speed, how fast can we grab that new knowledge, and identifying complex relations among stimulus patterns. And this goes back to this part of multitasking. Can you do it? And it's very clear when you're having like a father-son conversation, and the son started talking about 4 things at the same time, and the father goes, wait, one at a time, slow down. And then we say that you don't really learn if you're paying attention before you refer to things at the same time. So, the crystallized abilities increase during the lifespan through education, occupational and cultural experience, and exposure to cultural and intellectual pursuits. And that's one of the things that have been mentioned in the prevention of neurocognitive disorders that pursue new intellectual interests. And these are less affected by aging and disease and often remain intact. Often, not all the time, but remain intact, especially in the early stages of dementia. And that is sometimes when you're evaluating an older patient, and the family says, well, I see him kind of with some problems, but he remembers everything. Where he was born, what school he went, his childhood friends. Why? Because that's part of the crystallized information, the crystallized knowledge. However, in the fluid abilities, we know that since that varies through life, okay? We're at our best around our 20s, that's when it peaks, and then it starts to go down. So this information is very disheartening, because one thinks that you will start getting older until you're like 60 or 70, but actually you start getting older since you're late 20s, from this point of view, right? But we're still young. So fluid abilities also are affected by neurological insult, brain injury, alcohol abuse, okay. So does age affect competence? And I hope this topic interests, because we're going to move from here to actually talk about physicians, about medical competence among physicians. It turns out that this is a slide from the AMA, the American Medical Association, showing that the proportion 65 and older has grown. And it actually, if you look over here, it says that in general, since 1970, there were 300,000 physicians in the US. By 2008, it was close to 1 million. That's interesting, right? Because the population is over 200 million people in the US. So there are not enough physicians there. And also they're not distributed equally or as needed, very similar to how it happens in Mexico. Actually, I work in a rural area in California, and we're missing physicians all the time. So that problem exists in the US too. But look at this part of the bar, the yellow part. This is how much it's grown. The proportion has grown from 1970 to 2008. This is the 65 and older, and it's grown 400%. So there are a lot of older physicians working in the US. As compared to the other age groups, this is the one that has grown the most. Okay, so at UCSD, with Dr. Justin's leadership, this is a project that they had on evaluating physicians, to see how fit they were to continue practicing. Okay, and the idea was to see if any primary health condition affected that as well. And I'm going to go a little faster in the interest of time. And to do cognitive evaluations of physicians to see how much that was linked to function of the physician. Because usually when you ask somebody and you say, well, no, I'm functioning well. And we've seen that with older physicians, with our colleagues, right? And it becomes an issue to criticize them sometimes. And the younger physicians may be saying that same thing about us. So what they used was a computerized battery, which there are the names microcog and cog screen that measure mainly attention and reaction time. And then the comprehensive assessment with the neuropsychological test that you're familiar with, right? Like the trial making test, the conforming verbal learning test, fluency test, the Stroop. And this, what is very nice in the next few slides is what abilities, cognitive abilities that were being measured would translate into medical practice. So, for example, the premorbid intelligence and reading skills has to do with the ability of the physician to continue benefiting from continuing education, how to understand, how to communicate. As far as attention, in medical practice translates in ability to attend and determine what is critical and salient of a clinical case, to sustain auditory and visual attention to what's going on at that moment to a sustained period of time, and the ability to inhibit impulsive and incorrect responses. That has a lot to do with the frontal lobe. And then learning and memory, has to do with the ability to integrate new information. Remember, again, the fluid knowledge that we were talking about, and the ability to recognize and recall information efficiently and quickly without irrelevant information impeding your performance. About perceptual motor skills has to do with eye-hand coordination, and for example, that has a lot to do with physicians who are doing surgery. And it turns out that the county that I work in, California, only has one neurosurgeon, and he's like 85 now, and he's still operating. And I had a patient the other day telling me that she needs a neck surgery because has like 3 herniated discs. And she's seen this fight with an attorney because this happened at work, and says, why do you think about Dr. So-and-so? I said, why is that? I mean, he has a lot of experience. But my attorney told me he's already 85 and he's going to operate on my neck. And I said, well, it's funny because that doctor operated my father like 40 years ago. And I said, yeah, it's a very, very, very competent guy, right? And it's like, I said, you know what? This is a legal case. Why don't you do what your attorney says, right? Because and they're waiting to send the lady to UCSD actually saying to the counselor. But anyway, so about executive function skills, this have to do with the prefrontal lobe, the ability to quickly make changes when something is not going as expected, and you're used to a protocol of how to treat a patient, and then how quickly can you change and plan again, plan B in order to be successful. So physicians, us, are among those special groups who operate in an environment that is unforgiving. And this is very, patients don't tolerate that you make mistakes, right? So, because any cognitive failure can lead to catastrophic consequences. So these were the results, okay? And this is a very decent way of presenting. This was the percentage of physicians that scored at least one standard deviation below the mean for whatever is normal for their age. And if you look at it, in some cases it was about 25%, but in the case of numerical attention test, we already said how that could affect usual practice. Up to 42%, almost half, were under one standard deviation. And remember, it's one standard deviation, but in this environment that is so unforgiving, how risky that can be. So I'm going to finish with this. Doctors, it's a difficult decision. Why do you quit practicing? Right? So doctors can accommodate cognitive decline by choosing to cease procedural work, for example, surgery, or some interventional radiology, for example, allocating more time to each patient, using memory aids, and seeking advice from trusted colleagues and seeking second opinion. Now, there are some of us who are so narcissistic that we're probably going to find it hard to be doing that, but anyway, this is just the recommendation. So with that, I pass it on to my good friend, Steve Cole, and we're going to have time for questions at the end, so we'll start.
My name is Steve Coe from UCSD, like Ron said, and I want to thank you for letting us do this in English because, quite honestly, it's because of me that we're doing it in English because these two don't speak Spanish. So what I'm going to do is really go over for you why we think that the traditional understanding of aging may not be as simple as we think. We'll go through the first couple of slides pretty fast. So aging, is it really bad, right? Because it's something that we're not going to be able to reverse, right? All of us in this room probably have bought products that says anti-aging something, right? Be it facial cream, exercise, for some men using testosterone replacement therapy, et cetera, et cetera. But we're all going to age. This is an inevitable thing. And so the traditional understanding is that the aging body just declines, that eventually gravity wins, right? Cardiovascular changes happen, liver function, bone mineralization, everything just decreases, right? So nothing on this slide that says, as you age, your liver, your heart, everything becomes better, right? This is our traditional understanding of what aging is. Same thing with our memory. So this is the current understanding of what happens to our brain function. As Bernardo talked about, there are a lot of things that decrease. Processing speed, working memory, recall, etc. In fact, if you think about it, the mini mental status exam, MOCA, slums, etc. is all designed to test that elements of our brain and cognitive functioning that declines over time. Because the test is designed to screen for those individuals who actually have deficits. Okay? It's not designed to find those individuals that actually have improvements in certain elements of cognitive functioning. What is thought to be unaffected are the implicit automatic memory, autobiographical memory, recognition, and familiarity. This again is what we test when we look at Alzheimer's disease, because when we realize that a patient with Alzheimer's disease starts forgetting people's names that they knew for their entire lives, or forget facial recognition, we know that there's something grossly wrong there, because we believe that these things do not change. But when Bill Dresty and others have looked at this over time, they realized this simple thing. What they said was, wait a minute, if this is all true, shouldn't every single individual who starts getting older, shouldn't they all start feeling depression, anxiety, and uncertainty about their lives? But it turns out that's not true. A lot of studies have been done on this, and if you look at this graph here, as you grow older, the physical component of life and wellness goes down. This is to be expected because more illnesses happen, etc. But the mental component actually stays high and stays flat. And this is sort of an interesting question. And it turns out Again, as you grow older, we used to think that more disability one has, worse you're going to think about your life, right? In fact, the World Health Organization's assessment of health, which really revolves around disability adjusted life years, essentially sort of assumes that more disability one has in life, like less quality of life one has. Right? But if you ask this question of these individuals who are growing older with more disability, it turns out they will say, I'm actually aging pretty well. Right? So one way of looking at this is, well, there's something wrong about our current model and understanding of what aging is, right? Well, the second assumption that thing that we might say to ourselves is, well, maybe these older folks are happier because they see a lot of their friends dying and becoming more sicker than them, so they're saying, well, I'm actually doing better, right? So that's another way of looking at it too. But at the end of the day, we really don't know why this is happening. The paradox of aging really then comes down to this. It turns out, as you grow older, be it, even if you're male or female, your attitude about your life, your aging, how you see yourself, be it from physical health, mental health, etc., seems to increase. And if you look at this graph here, around the age of 38 to about 55 or so is the lowest level when individuals say that they're at their happiest. And then as they grow older, they become happier and say, like, I'm actually feeling a lot better, right? And so when I first looked at this when I was a fellow under Dilla, one of the questions I had was, well, wait a minute, like, this was done in the U.S., right? So this is right around that age group when all the parents who are in that age range is supporting their kids, right? So then suddenly when their kids are more self-sufficient and making their own money and living on their own, suddenly the bonus factor goes up because now they're out of the house and you can do whatever you want to do. But it's not as simple as that. What we find is, from the perspective of attitudes, optimism, resiliency, self-efficacy, all goes up. Self-perception of stress goes down though, right? So older you are, things don't bother us as much. Health, low level of depressive symptoms, right? Self-rated health is actually better. And exercise at any level, writing, socialization, etc., all of these things actually have a higher return on investment of time. And we see this with older folks all the time. And so we know that there are certain physical health measures that actually goes down, but a lot of other things actually improve, including resiliency and wisdom. And that there's no real good way to measure these things. And we also found that some seniors actually do a lot better than others. Right? And why is that? Right? And we talked about how how you can't teach old dogs new tricks, and people wanted to test this. Right? Is this actually true? Right? What you see on the left here, to your left here, is that when you're actually studying new things, different parts of the brain actually lights up. Right? And this doesn't seem to really correspond that well with that individual's age. The one on the right is looking at a rat model where you look at an old rat and you actually teach them new tricks, literally. Right? And it turns out, even though like the processing speed might be down, they actually could generate new neuronal buds. And so you actually have growth in neural connections, even if the mouse is much older than their peers. So the compensation in neurogenesis and centrogenesis doesn't necessarily end. And so that's why as a geriatric psychiatrist, I say to people, just because a patient becomes 65 doesn't mean that after that age, everything is understayed the same with its decline. It doesn't work like that. Right? And in fact, the age 65 as a cutoff that we use in the US really is an artificial number. There's nothing that says once you hit age 65 that everything about you is going to somehow decline. Right? We picked that age 65 because that's when Medicare, our large insurance in the US, just kicks in. It's just convenient for us to say 65 is when you're really now old. And this concept of resiliency and threshold, this idea that the liability goes up and a patient may have lower or increased threshold to actually get illness, right? That this idea that this threshold is now lower as you grow older, and this is uniform across all age groups, is simply not correct. There are individuals who, as they grow older, they actually do better at some of these things, right? So like we talked about before, they don't get stressed as much, and so the onset of anxiety or depressive symptoms, it actually takes more stress for some older individuals to actually go into depression or anxiety. And talking about wisdom, it seems pretty clear to us, and hopefully all of you will agree with me, that there comes a time in our lives where we say to ourselves, oh my God, it turns out what my father and my mother have been telling me has been true, right? It's very annoying, right, when you realize this. And it's doubly annoying when suddenly you're telling your younger peers and your colleagues the same thing that your parents and your mentors have said to you, right? It's actually pretty disturbing, to be honest. But it turns out this concept of wisdom, which is not very well defined, seems to increase and gets better as we age. And that has very significant consequences. For example, pragmatic knowledge of life or social decision-making seems to be a lot better. Right? It's amazing when you talk to older physicians and older colleagues, and they haven't even seen the case, but you present a case to them, and they could pinpoint exactly what the core issue is just by your presentation. Right? In fact, if you guys ever teach medical students or residents, you see this all the time, right? The complaint is the medical student or the resident has spent an hour, 2 hours interviewing the patient, and suddenly the older doctor enters the room, and the story completely changes, right? And so the resident says, why does this happen to me all the time? Right? Emotional regulation, reflection, self-understanding changes. Right? So when we're younger, we tend to be very impulsive, and in fact, even as physicians, we probably make more impulsive decisions. But with older physicians, this tends to go away. Right? And so, it might be from your experience, it might be from the fact that you're able to think about different emotional aspects about a case and actually make the right decisions at the end. And the decisions that really require experience, it turns the older physicians to do better. So there are a lot of studies that have done about this, where any decision that relies on previous experience, older physicians do better. Okay, and so what they did is they took two groups, one younger physician group, one older, and what they did is they gave them same tasks, and then they tested them again later, which relied on the previous tasks. Right, so it's not like the older and the younger folks didn't see the similar tasks before, right? So they both saw the same thing. It turns out the older physicians did better because they relied on their past experience on the same task. But if the task was not linked, so it was independent from one another, then the reverse was true.